As many of you know, I like to keep an update on what's going on during the US election season. So today I'm going to be doing an update on Donald Trump's astrology chart. Now, he had actually gained some popularity right after that attempt at that rally in the last few weeks. But this popularity is beginning to wane again since the announcement of Kamala Harris running. And then also, he's recently made some offensive statements about Kamala Harris. So we're going to do an update looking at former President Trump's chart, just to get an idea of what could we see as of today. Looking at the charts, what is it going to look like in November during election time? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. For those of you that are new to my channel, make sure you like and subscribe. By the way, I practice Vedic sidereal astrology, which is astrology from ancient India. You'll notice the chart looks a little different if you're new to this. Your sign might be different using this method. If you're interested in a personal private reading, check down below for details. And also, I just want to remind you all that this astrology readings for entertainment purposes only. All these statements about Donald Trump, well, this is just my interpretation of the astrological energies, and it's not necessarily fact. So let's go ahead and let's pull up the chart. First of all, I'm going to point out a few things. Now, it's interesting that Donald Trump's going to be changing astrological periods right before the election. So usually an antardasha can last about 6 months to several years, and he's changing that right before the election. Let me discuss that for a moment, and then we'll focus on the planetary period that he's going to be in November. We're going to do a deeper focus on that. So let me pull up the chart for you all. So this is Donald Trump's chart. Um, Now he's in a K2 antardasha right now. He's in a K2. This is the Antardasha. He's in a Jupiter Mahadasha, by the way. So Jupiter K2 is going to be the period he's in. But right about September 27th, he's going to be changing into a Venus Antardasha. Okay. So he's making that change right before the election. So we're really going to be focusing on the Venus karma right here, and I'll be kind of extrapolating what that means. Now, K2 period, the reason why I've had a lot of reservation with Trump's chart is K2 is typically not a period of growth. It's typically not a period of success. It's really rare when somebody sees like a lot of gains during a K2 period, because K2 is usually associated with us losing things in our lives. It's usually something, it's taking away something, a belief system, a relationship, even a career kind of move. So these are all things to consider. So K2 is typically not a great astrological period. However, there have been exceptions to that. For example, when Boris Johnson had won the election, he was in a K2 period. So there are always exceptions to the rule. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Donald Trump's, the Jupiter Mahadasha he's in first of all, and then we'll go into the Venus period shortly here. Let me pull up the slideshow. We'll talk about his life path for a moment as well. So he's got a 4 life path, which is all about building foundations, routines, patience. And even though he doesn't show a lot of patience, he's in a 1 personal year. This is the thing that actually is going for him numerologically. He's in a 1 personal year, but Kamala is also in a 1 personal year, if I remember right. So they're both in a numerologically, they're both in a 1 personal year, which is really good for a new pursuit. Now, his nakshatra, his rising nakshatra is Maga, and Maga people tend to be very proud, dignified. They're ruled by the ancestors, charismatic. There can always, of course, there's 2 poles to this. You know, somebody could be very charming and charismatic, but then somebody could be very self-centered and narcissistic on the extreme other end of the pole as well. He's a Leo ascendant. Leo ascendant people tend to be very much in the spotlight. They tend to be very charismatic. Now let's talk about the Jupiter Mahadasha for a moment. And I'm going to pull the chart up so you all can see that. Now, the Jupiter period, he's going to be in that period from now all the way till 2032. So this is the longer general period that we're going to cover. So Jupiter, it's in the second house, which isn't necessarily bad at all. And it rules the fifth house and it rules the eighth house. Okay, so this is the fifth house over here, and this is the eighth house. Now, for Leo ascendant, Jupiter is not necessarily a positive planet as much as you would think, because it rules the eighth house. It tends to be a planet more of transformation than anything else. Also, we have to consider the eighth house is also associated with scandals. The eighth house can actually, it can ruin somebody essentially. So the eighth house is a very sudden kind of explosive energy. It's a very difficult energy to really channel. Now, in the second house, Jupiter is going to show, obviously, there's a lot of wealth there, and we know that he's known for his wealth. He has a lot to say, obviously, with Jupiter in the second house. Remember, wherever Jupiter goes, it tends to multiply things. Let me pull up the slide so we can analyze Jupiter a little bit. Now, when someone's in a Jupiter period in general, it's generally a good thing. Okay, it's a natural benefic, but like I said, it might be a functional malefic for some, especially for Leo ascendant. It can tend to be malefic because of the eighth house quality there. So in Vedic astrology, that's the thing we always have to remember, is that even though a planet like Venus or Jupiter is considered a natural benefic, it can still be a functional malefic according to what houses it rules or even what house it's in the astrology chart. So Jupiter tends to be a time of learning, spirituality, prosperity, leadership, philosophical understanding, all those kind of things. In the second house, it's going to bring wealth, knowledge, values to somebody's life. But however, if you notice at the bottom of the slide, Jupiter is the eighth lord for Leo ascendant, but this can bring bankruptcies, and he's declared bankruptcy several times, I believe, throughout his life, and also scandalous speech. So he tends to say things that are very triggering. So these recent comments that he made about Kamala, and he was questioning the ancestry, or something along those lines, could be very offensive to people. Let's go ahead and talk about Jupiter as it's been so far. Now, the one thing to point out is when Trump had won the presidency back in 2016, he was actually not in Jupiter Mahadasha. He was actually in Rahu Mahadasha. And if I pull up the chart, so during the election, he was in a really good time period. His chart is way stronger back then than it is now. Okay, so it's way stronger. So he was in a Rahu period, and if you look, Rahu's with Sun. It's in the 10th house, kind of the same astrological period that Joe Biden was in when he won the presidency in 2020. So he's not in the, Trump is not in the same period. He's in the Jupiter period. And so far, we have to consider this period hasn't been really that great for him. So his presidency ended up essentially, he didn't get reelected. And that's one of the things about, if, especially in the United States, usually if you're a president, usually you're in for 2 terms. It's usually assumed that as the incumbent, you're going to win in a general way. Okay. So the fact that he was in 1 term, it shows Jupiter wasn't good for him. He's also had a lot of scandals since then. We had the Stormy Daniels stuff going on. We had the recent court cases and all these things. So it's actually been a very scandalous period. That's why I'm very skeptical about this general energy about what Jupiter's bringing up for Trump, because it hasn't been good. It's been overall, we have to look at the results of the planet. So in the slide, I say Jupiter has not been a good planet for Trump. Consider that Trump has been a very polarizing president. He's been under many investigations, trials, accusations during this turbulent period of the eighth lord. Also, Jupiter has been related to him not winning the presidency in 2020. So we have to remember that. He was in Rahu Mahadasha when he won in 2016. However, the eighth house, and this is the big exception, the eighth house can recycle or renew or resurrect people. So that's the wild card element in all of this. This is why it's so hard to make a very solid astrological prediction when we're talking about astrology charts, even though as of right now I feel like Kamala's chart is stronger overall. It's stronger. Now they don't if I was to look at both of the charts, they're not as strong as when Trump's chart in 2016 or Biden's chart in 2020. So they're not, both of them are not as strong as those charts. But out of the two, she's in the Rahu Mahadasha, which is catapulting, and it's in Kamala's first house. We're going to be doing another analysis on Kamala before the election here, but she's in a stronger Mahadasha, I feel. Now let's talk about the Venus Antardasha. So that's going to be the period right up to the election. That's going to be September 2024 to May 2027. Now, usually when you change Antardashas, there's going to be some residual K2 energy there. So we have to remember that. There's usually there's this thing called Dasha Sandhi in Vedic astrology where the periods are overlapping, usually for a month or two. So K2 energies are still going to be active. And remember, K2 is a separative type of influence when we're talking about it. Let's look at where Venus is in the astrology chart. Now, Venus is an interesting energy for Leo. It does rule the 10th house. Okay, I do have to say Venus rules the 10th house, but there's a lot of ifs about this situation with Venus. Okay, the first thing, it does rule the 10th house, which would be seen as good, but it rules the third house. Okay. But the thing is if we look at where Venus is placed, it's in the 12th house. Okay. Usually for a planet to produce what what it wants to produce, it usually needs to be in a good house. So for example, if Venus was in the trine houses, or if Venus was in one of the Kendra houses, the Kendra houses would be 1, 4, 7, or 10. But it's in the 12th house, which is a loss of energy. So when we're asking about, is the 10th Lord going to produce, we have to look, okay, is the 10th Lord strong? Because it might be the 10th Lord, but it's not necessarily going to produce the results that it wants. Also, I want to point out two other factors that are going on. There's a few other factors. The other thing is to consider is that Venus is next to Saturn. So Saturn's suppressing Venus. That's usually not that great of a thing. And Saturn is the sixth lord for Leo ascendant. Also, Venus is not strong in the sign of Cancer. And it's also not strong. It's in the sign of Cancer in the Navamsa chart. So Venus is not very strong. It's in the 12th house. Can it produce what the 10th house wants? It doesn't look very promising when I'm looking at the chart. It looks like a very weak chart, actually. And we know that the Jupiter period hasn't been very strong so far. Let's pull up the slide again. Let's look at that. We'll kind of explore that. So Venus periods tend to be very diplomatic, pleasure-seeking relationships. But like I said, Venus is weakly placed in the D1 chart, which is the main chart. It's in the sign of Cancer in both the D1 chart and the Navamsa chart. It's not very strong. It's in the 12th house, which represents letting go of things. If anything, it could represent a dream of wanting something, a dream of maybe wanting what the 10th house represents, but not getting it. It's out of reach. So, for example, it can represent dream worlds, enlightenment, spiritual growth, and the hidden aspects of life. But it doesn't necessarily, it's the opposite of materializing. See, if it was in the 10th house or the 4th house or the first house, it would be materializing, but it's in a house that's not materializing. And also being with Saturn, it can also bring a lot of obstacles as well. Now, Venus is the 10th Lord, like I said. It would normally be beneficial for Leo ascendant, even though it's a tricky energy because it rules the third house, and the third house is considered a mildly malefic house. But like I said, we already talked about Venus is in the 12th house. It's with Saturn and it's weak in the sign of Cancer. Those are the difficulties there. That's why I don't see it being very strong. Let's talk about the Saturn transit as well, because there's some transits that are going on. So let's go ahead and talk about those really quickly. The Saturn transit's always important to look at, no matter what planetary dasha you're in. So in Trump's chart, Saturn is in the seventh house of Aquarius right now. It's retrograde. The retrograde motion can definitely cause some problems during the election in general. So we may be encountering some sort of obstacles around that period already, just during the election for both charts. Okay. Now, in the seventh house has to do with marriage, but it has to do with things like court cases, fairness, disputes. So there's something about this placement, and this transit with Saturn, by the way, it started January 2023 and it's going to last until March of 2025. So I feel like with this, it's going to be retrograde too on the day of the election. It's not. It's going to stop being retrograde on November 15th. Well, one of the problems with this planet being here is it could represent like a disputed election. So whatever is going on with this election, it could be a disputed election. There's something that doesn't feel fair about it from Trump's point of view with the Saturn going in the seventh house. Because Saturn, what it does is it tends to delay or reduce. The seventh house is all about balance and fairness from the point of view of the native. Remember that. So there's something that's delaying. There's some obstacles there with Saturn being in the seventh house. So when we're considering legal issues, so there could be some sort of dispute around the time of the election that comes up as well with this sort of transit. I do want to keep that in our in our minds as the election approaches here. There could be some sort of legal, but he's already been in legal cases. If you think about it, it's already been going on. Let's pull the slide up again. We'll talk about that. So Saturn retrograde, seventh house, marriage, contracts, justice, courts. From 45's point of view, there may be a feeling of injustice during this time. The transit will be retrograde during the election. Also, the transit won't complete till March 25th. There's a possibility of a contested election. The courts may be involved. Doesn't it seem like now, like every election seems like so many of the elections now are just like disputed. They're just like all of a sudden when you get the results, there's like these court cases that come out. It seems like it's been that way since some of you might remember the Bush versus Gore. That was back in what, 2000? Ever since those hanging chads in Florida, it seems like as soon as the results come in and there's like, if there's a swing state and there's some question coming up about a swing state, there's immediately they're running to the courts. So it does seem a little weird now that it's so competitive that usually legalities get involved with this. But like I said, I feel like Trump is fighting an uphill battle. I don't feel like he's got a lot of strong energy behind him. And then considering that the establishment itself, he's been in all these legal cases, it seems like there's a lot of bad luck with this Jupiter Mahadasha that he's in. It's not really supporting his aspiration. That being said, there could always be wild card things that happen. October surprise, all sorts of events that could happen between now and the election. So I'm going to be continually doing charts and really analyzing charts during the election. Right now, as far as we know, Kamala hasn't chosen a VP yet as of the recording of this video, but that should be very shortly here. So thank you for watching, and I will see everyone in the next video. Thanks for being here.